It's still early days, but what has been the most challenging piece of legislation that you've worked on so far, and why?
That is a very good question. Um, so I'm going to talk about the employment rights bill,
Right.
and not because this is challenging per se, but it's a big and significant piece of legislation. So Labour pledged to introduce this bill, which does a whole host of things for employment rights. We said that we would do that within 100 days of being in government, and we have. And there are a number of aspects to that which are subject to consultation with business. But overall, this piece of legislation can be really transformative for people's rights at work, particularly those on lower pay. So it's a really significant piece of legislation, and I'll be certainly paying very close attention to that as it goes on its passage through Parliament.
Looking back on your legal career and now as an MP, is there a particular case or political achievement that you're most proud of?
Well, I am going to put politics on one side for a second because I don't think I've been doing this job long enough to say that
Fair enough.
to pick out a huge achievements so far. So give me a bit more time on that. That's not to say that there aren't things that I've done and that we've done as a party that I'm proud of. But given the short period of time that I'm doing it, I'll concentrate on law instead. I mean, I think I've been involved in a number of cases over my legal career that I'm really proud of. Um, so one I was involved with just before I left my law firm is actually a case that is ongoing. It is a case concerning environmental issues as well as contractual issues and consumer law issues, and it's to do with the emissions that come from certain types of vehicles which are polluting for the atmosphere. So you may have heard about cases in this particular area, but there are some manufacturers who are the defendants in those cases, and they are facing claims from millions, actually, I think, in total, of people across the country whose vehicles, it's alleged, are more polluting than they were led to be at the time of the sale. So that's just one example of really quite a significant area of cases, I should say, that I think can make a clearly sort of have a big impact from a societal point of view.
After a long day at work, how do you relax?
Good question. So I quite like doing exercise. You wouldn't necessarily know it to look at me. But actually, that's more of a pre-work thing because I tend to, if I go for a run or that tends to be in the morning. But then after work, I mean, as a member of Parliament, you do often have to work quite late. So we're all subject to whipping arrangements, as you'll know, in Parliament, and sometimes votes can take place really quite late. So I've been voting, I think, around about 11 o'clock already. And, when that happens, you do get home quite late. You can be a little bit tired the next morning. So sometimes it's, you don't get an evening off work. I think that's certainly fair to say. When I do, I like spending time with my children, and we'll watch some TV together, or we will have some food together, or we will do all the things that my son and my daughter love doing. So we'll do some baking, or we will take a football to the park. You can imagine there's lots of nice things to do with the children, which generally putting my phone down and spending time with them is a good idea.
And finally, other than my podcast, what would one find in your Spotify library?
Oof, that's a good question. So I'm a big fan of a podcast called Politics at Jack and Sam's. I don't know if you've come across that one.
No, I haven't. Who's it? Who hosts it?
Jack Blanchard from Politico and Sam Coates from The Times.
Oh, nice.
It's quite a short podcast, so it's only about 20 minutes or less, and they do it most mornings, I think, perhaps not Saturday, but it's quite because it's quite short, it's quite bite-sized, and it's quite. I found it quite interesting to listen to their views about what's going to go on in politics on that particular day, or at the weekend. They talk about what's coming up in Westminster that week. So I find that one quite interesting. I also quite like Beth Rigby's podcast, Electoral Dysfunction. So that one's pretty good. And Harriet Harman's recently joined that alongside Beth and Ruth Davidson. So I find that one pretty good listening. I listened to Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart's podcast.
I love them. I went to their live show at the O2 recently.
Oh, really? Cool. How was that?
It was brilliant.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm a bit jealous of that, actually. I'd quite like to see them live. So as you're probably getting a sense of this, it's a bit political. I do, there's some health podcasts in there somewhere as well, but I listen to those less often. It's generally about politics.
What about music-wise?
Music. So I have a number of playlists. One's for the treadmill, and which tend to be a bit more energetic for obvious reasons. But I quite often, so at the moment, I don't get the opportunity to listen to a whole load of new music. So the way that I collate my podcast is I just pay quite close attention to what the children tell me to listen to. So, and they have access to the stuff on my Apple Music, so they will add songs for me onto playlists. And actually, they've got pretty good taste, I think. So yeah, that's quite advantageous from my point of view.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to Women in Westminster, Lucy.
It's an absolute pleasure, Eleni, and thanks very much for inviting me on. I'm really grateful.
Listeners, join us next week on Women in Westminster when I'll be speaking with Satvir Kaur.